So let's begin. Well, Emery, I have a copy here of lay Catholic LGB discrimination in the 21st century, the report that you've done. News headlines, though, keep telling us that things are getting better and better for LGBTQ people. Why was there the need for this research to be done at this time?
Well, we certainly have seen a great deal of secular improvements. We've seen protection legislation for LGBT people. We've also seen legal protections in terms of the right to marry and civil partnerships and adoption rights, etc., around Europe, North America, parts of Australasia. But it's different if you are an LGB Catholic. And so what GNRC wanted to do was really explore what types, if any, discrimination still existed for Catholics in this sense, really, and to look for the evidence base and really to kind of see also what was happening in people's everyday lives, because we've heard a great deal about the kinds of physical violence that people can unfortunately suffer. And I think it was really important to get a sense of how everyday discrimination may be lived amongst LGBT Catholics.
It sounds like there's a lot in this report that's going to be very important to read. According to the title, it seems that discrimination against transgender and intersex people is not considered in this report. Is there a reason only lesbian, gay, and bisexual people were covered?
I think it's clearly a very, very important issue for trans people and intersex Catholics. Of discrimination, and given that this is the first GNRC report and it's quite short, it was done over 4 months, there just wasn't the time to consider such a very important issue in the same depth, so it will be considered in future GNRC research.
Thank you. We'll look forward to reading that. Can you tell our viewers which forms of discrimination did you identify? And how did these forms of discrimination influence the lives of LGBT Catholics?
I think it's quite an important question. I could be here all day talking about it, so I'll just give an overview. I think, to be honest, the soundbite from this is that LGBT Catholics could experience discrimination wherever they encounter the Catholic Church. And I think what came through the research, through the literature review that I did, and the questionnaires, which were from GNR people across the world. Religious life, you might anticipate, so parish work, people being rejected from positions, paid or unpaid, rejected and silenced within a parish environment. But also in education, there are many, many examples in the research of teachers being silenced and living under the threat of being sacked, and indeed being sacked and having careers cut short because they were teaching Catholic schools and were either perceived to be gay or bisexual, or were indeed gay and bisexual and then found out, as it were. Same with students. One researcher calls Catholic schools a hotbed, a homophobic hotbed of bullying, from her work in Canada. We see in areas of the family where people growing up into a Catholic family can, once they start to realize that they are gay and then start to tell their family, that because this potentially at the moment goes against Catholic teaching, that can cause all sorts of upset and distancing in families where people become rejected. I think in health, we've seen examples of where gay and bisexual people work in a Catholic health institution. Again, they can be under that same threat of being sacked or dismissed because of their sexuality. And there are examples in this research of where patients have been given either rejected from treatment or given poorer treatment because of their sexuality in Catholic situations. There's all sorts of things I could go, but I'll keep it quite short. I think in terms of the types, which I wasn't really anticipating, there's a direct type of discrimination where people are told that they can't do something like adopting children through a Catholic agency or being sacked. And then indirect discrimination, which seems to cover an awful lot of the examples. So the promotion of only heterosexuality and heterosexual families in schools and parishes, ignoring homophobic bullying, or actually perpetuating it, which is quite an undercurrent in a lot of the educational research that comes through here, and silencing the reality of lay Catholic LGB people's lives. In terms of those influences, as you might expect, it can be quite damaging. Research suggests that people can undergo a kind of identity crisis and find it difficult to reconcile the sexuality with the Catholicism. That this can lead, not in all cases, but it can lead to a reduced quality of life, and it can lead to emotional trauma. And I have a quote here from a Catholic lesbian woman in Poland. "I denied myself being close to people. I denied myself love, not only the romantic kind." And I think that quote speaks for many. In addition to that, there have been disrupted, as I said, relationships with family, loss of income, and a lot of people have left the church, really. So that should give you a flavor.
Amazing, the broad spectrum of forms of discrimination in every area of life. It's really, really shocking. I think now's a good time to put a face to some of that by hearing the voice of someone from Africa who has experienced discrimination.
It is not easy to discuss issues of sexuality and sexual orientation, but we are humans. We are queer, and we Sawubona. Hello, my name is Masonic Dude, born and bred in Bulawayo, Zimbabwe. I'm a gay Catholic man living in Johannesburg, South Africa. I have felt discrimination due to the church teachings. For instance, the church teachings on what a family should be like and who it should consist of. This has for a number of times made me feel that I do not belong, as my relationship with another man does not fit in the model of what the church perceives to be a relationship, let alone family. I dream of a day when the church will change the way she views same-sex marriages and relationships. Of course, I'm African. It is not easy to discuss issues of sexuality and sexual orientation, but we are humans. We are queer, and we are here to stay.
A very brave voice that was, a true spirit. Emery, we've heard a lot about the Francis effect on LGB issues, meaning that Pope Francis's influence has helped to make a brighter day for LGBT people, both inside and outside the church. Do you think that Pope Francis has helped the cause of LGBT equality?
So I think what you're referring to is that since becoming Pope, Pope Francis has met with LGBT groups, he has encouraged LGBT clergy, he's condemned homophobic attacks. I think the simple answer to this, yes, of course, it's a positive step forward, and it's absolutely to be encouraged. And in fact, everybody of the 29 people who responded to the questionnaire spoke of their hope and their optimism for the papacy of Francis, and indeed what types of equality and sense of joy that he could bring to LGBT Catholics' lives. And I have one example here for you. Pope Francis has been a blessing in my life, which positively affects my relationships. And I think that's just such a simple but actually incredibly powerful statement, that the protestations of the Pope, which in some sense can seem quite abstract, have the influence on a person's everyday life and relationships. So absolutely, yes. But I have to give a caveat to that and say that a major finding of the report was that homophobia is institutionally embedded within the Catholic Church, and until church teaching on homosexuality changes, the Francis effect will be a rather nice plaster on a broken arm.
A good way to put it. Some hope, but still a lot of work to be done.
Absolutely.
Let's now hear from another witness, this one from the Asia Pacific region.
Hi, I'm Yael from the Philippines. I'm a lesbian Catholic who lives and works in Manila. I experienced discrimination inside the church as a teenager when a group of catechists and a priest confronted me about my sexuality during a recollection for youths in church. It happened during the time that I was still questioning my sexuality, and the probing and questions they asked made me feel vulnerable and all the more confused. Maybe their intentions were good, but what they did made me feel unwelcome and pushed me away from the church because it made me feel unaccepted. It's been 20 years since, and I have since reconciled with my faith, but I pray that the church might change so that young Catholic lesbians of today need not go through what I went through. Pushing them away at a time when they need guidance and acceptance the most makes it harder for them than it already is. I should know. That's what I felt when it happened to me.
Wow, a stark reminder that LGBT youth, young people, are really often the most tragic victims in this discussion. Emery, can you tell us what you've learned from this research, from doing the research?
I think that could be here all afternoon again with that one, but three, I think, core areas. Firstly, I think as a Catholic, of course I was aware of LGBT discrimination, but I hadn't realized how complex an issue it is. I had kind of expected to find things in the parish with clergy and a lack of acceptance in some cases, and found that, but actually I found that it's much more subtle than that. In places, for example, in Latin America, where the church has been instrumental in building national law and identity, as with Poland, we found a much stronger connection there. So, and also a lack of some passing of legislation. And even when legislation is passed, and this was the interesting thing, to protect LGBT people and promote equality, people felt stigmatized. Coming forward would out them, and then even if they had legal protection, they were still frightened of being sacked or discriminated, or generally just being discriminated against. So I think the informal types of discrimination was quite a kind of a learning curve. Having said that, people didn't always become discriminated against. So there were varied responses from the internalization and very damaging effects of internalized homophobia from the church's teaching, but also right the way through to more increasing youth groups in schools and universities, particularly as we saw some examples in Canada, where people are challenging. In one great case, there was a teenage boy who wanted to take his boyfriend to the prom, and he was told no, and he fought and actually won. So I think there were some great examples here, as much as it's about discrimination, of about positive, inclusive parishes and networks, and also inclusive practice by the church itself, not just simply acknowledging threats from people. And as well as that, I'd say there's kind of a lot of reasons for hope too. You talked about the Francis effect, and there are definitely areas in the world where there is a great deal to look forward to. And we've seen inclusive work in schools in England, for example. And I think finally, as a researcher, I'd have to say, of course, there's a need for more research, because I think what this report does is it brings together the academic work, and it brings together GNRCs, people's lived experiences. But I think it's also the tip of the iceberg. I think we really need much more in-depth work on this. Inversely, I think there's also a need for large statistical databases and sources, because we know that this affects a great deal of people, but we don't exactly know how many and in which countries. So I think there's a huge need there for statistical descriptive analysis.
Well, thank you very much, Emery. It sounds like you did learn a lot, and that the story is really very, very complex. I think that's one of the best recommendations for why people should be reading this report. The groundbreaking work in laying out what will, as you say, be future research into this topic. Let's now hear from a voice from the European region.
Hi, my name is Luis, and I'm from Spain. I'm a bisexual Catholic who lives and works here in Madrid. I have lived discrimination inside the church. I have not experienced personally, but I have seen how LGBTI people are made invisible. The place that is reserved for them is very little. They don't perform good functions, although it is intuited that they are there in the church, but they cannot assume responsibilities in which they are seen too much. This made me feel uncomfortable, and I asked me the reason for what they had to be silenced. I hope that one day in the church, all the people might change. Above all, the way of thinking, because that could visualize the LGBTI people and make us feel better, welcomed, integrated into the spirit of the Church of Jesus.
Wow, invisibility, that's an important issue to remember. It seems that there are so many policies in this report. You report on so many policies, so many governments, so many different nations, so many different parts of the church. Are there any common threads to the oppression that run through the research?
Well, you're right to say it's complex, and there's a lot going on there. I think in terms of 20 years, to say, first of all, there's been a great deal of change in 20 years, and all the time now we're seeing more secular changes, so legal advances in equality that are occurring, and people are using these legal, the right to get married, etc., to fight against discrimination. So we're seeing more of that in the research that's coming through. So there's definitely a change. It's a changing area, and will continue to change, I imagine. I think what's also happening is that we're seeing increasing, and I'll call them pockets of inclusivity, because it can be piecemeal. It could be that somebody is accepted at parish level. There could be all sorts of things going on at parish level. There could be schools who are actively encouraging and changing their policies, Catholic schools. So I think that's definitely, and as you combine that with the Francis effect, hopefully those things will go forward. But I think I have to say, the one common thread that runs through this is that homophobia is institutionally embedded in the Catholic Church through its teaching. Its teaching at the moment is, despite the great things that Francis is doing, is still that people are intrinsically disordered with a propensity to evil. Now, you know, there's no getting beyond that. That absolutely is the thread that runs right the way through this research. And even though at the same time in 1986, the church said, however, you should make sure that people are supported and not treated badly, it's a very duplicitous statement. And a lot of the homophobic bullying that we see coming through in the evidence is a result of this contradictory and quite negative teaching that it's okay to be gay, but you can't do anything. But even as we're seeing in the research, it's the perception of being gay that is enough to fire people. So that's, yes, we can't get away from it, that institutional homophobic discrimination is as a result of church teaching and its interpretation, and that it has the potential to pervade areas of life beyond the parish, such as the family, health, employment, education, and the quality of people's relationships.
Wow. Sounds like besides changing hearts and minds, we really have to change the whole system and the culture of the church for this to really, for life to really improve for LGBT Catholics.
Absolutely. I mean, from papacy to parish and everywhere in between.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of work. We'll now going to hear testimony from a person living in Latin America.
Since I can remember, I used to hear that a homosexual person was a sinner. I couldn't receive God's grace and favor, neither be allowed into the kingdom. Then you begin to build a way of thinking that allows you to hide who you really are. Later, I realized how I had become something they warned me about, because discrimination started on my own. As I lived with a very harmful shame and negative attitude and perception of myself. Denying yourself is like not accepting that you are part of God's perfection creation. Unlike many people's thinking, we are not an aberration or abomination. We are all very dear children of God, and of course we are perfect and loved in His eyes. I dream of an inclusive church that follows the true example of Jesus, welcoming, loving, and respecting everyone without conditions. It's incredibly sad to see that many LGBTIQ brothers and sisters can't freely live their faith because they feel unworthy of God's love. The church we need to promote should be based in love and no hatred, release itself from discrimination, and embrace us as a unique community.
Well, pretty amazing. Not just the suffering that people have experienced, but the strength and the courage they find to overcome it. Very inspiring, very inspiring voice. Emery, Orthodox Catholic teaching promotes respect, compassion, and sensitivity for LGBT people. And it calls on Catholic people to respect the human dignity and the equality of all people, regardless of their condition in life. What makes it so difficult for Catholic leaders to apply these clear teachings to LGBT human rights?
I think that that's a very complex issue, which this report has really only touched on. But again, to be a dog with a bone, I would say that at the heart of those kinds of issues is this negative, contradictory church position at the moment, where you have gay people being explained, LGBT people, as in a disordered state with a propensity to evil. And then at the same breath, you have them saying, however, quote, "It is deplorable that homosexual persons are the object of violent malice in speech or action." So you've got this kind of contradiction, and that was never really resolved. And although the church has stated that it or anybody else should not be being homophobic, it absolutely has been. And the second part has never really fully been implemented. So a lot of the educational research that's been done, particularly in Canada, is pointing out the fact that this idea that being gay is being used by teachers and not just teachers, but by the bishops in parts of Canada to undermine LGB existence, at the expense of actually promoting the welfare and the well-being of people. So again, Callahan called this the kind of hotbed of homophobia. So you've had these statements from the 1980s. You've had a lack of support for people, actually, according to the church's own statements. But you've seen increasingly since then these knee-jerk reactions to sexuality from the church. And I think it's created, I know this isn't the point of this report in a sense, but what I've noticed is that it's kind of, people talk about this culture of fear, of being frightened, of living with the fear of being found out, because so many bad things have been said about people, that even if you say, well, you know, in some cases, I'm a gay teacher, people are bullying me, which is certainly some of the cases I've seen in here, they're frightened to come out because they'll get sacked. So it's generally, this duality is incredibly negative, and I think the church has found it difficult to be on the one hand supportive without being homophobic. Now that there are exceptions to that, that is certainly not a carte blanche position. What we're seeing now is some kind of stepping back from that position. So what we're seeing with Francis is that he's actually following up on the, it's, you know, you have to support gay people, gay Catholics. Yeah, it's that duplicity between intrinsically disordered, but you know, you must support people.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's it was a great answer to a very difficult question.
It was.
Our final voice today comes from a North American witness.
Hi, my name is Mary Ann Burke, and I'm a married lesbian Catholic who lives in Boston, Massachusetts. I have experienced discrimination due to church teaching on sexual orientation and gender identities in numerous ways, but probably the one that sticks out the most for me is that when my partner and I applied to Catholic Charities to become pre-adoptive foster parents, we were denied the opportunity to even go through the training or to have a child placed with us simply because we were two women. The fact that this organization that I so respected and that did so much good work could write us off simply because of our sexual orientation was really painful. And knowing that it meant that children would stay in foster care and have unstable and impermanent situations for a longer time made it even more difficult to deal with. I hope that someday our church will acknowledge that everybody's sexual orientation or gender identity is a blessing and a gift from God, and that's what we're working for.
Wow. Well, discrimination hurts people beyond the LGB community, children often in some cases. Emery, your report has some great recommendations in it, and I think everyone should read those recommendations carefully. What can ordinary Catholics do to help put those recommendations into practice?
So I wrote the recommendations at Vatican level. It did say about the church teaching and the hierarchy planning to change. However, the report has been about the impact of discrimination on everyday lives. So from that context, there's a huge amount that that all lay Catholics can do. And I would invite, again, all Catholics to read the report and consider the ways in which it speaks to them. You might work in a Catholic school, you might not be gay, but you might see discrimination on a daily basis. And it's not just about what people say, it's about what they don't do. So one of your participants here talked about being silenced. And I think it's as important to talk about the silence and what isn't happening as much as it is to call out the obvious discrimination. So consider the ways in which the report talks to people and what they can do in their own lives. I think also support the work of LGB Catholic and equalities organizations, which are working in this field. Find inclusive ministries. If you're being discriminated against, find a different church, go to a different parish, make your views known, whoever they are to. If it's service providers, is it the Catholic Church? Use equalities legislation where it exists. And as much as you're doing that for discrimination, I would also say to write and praise and support the work of inclusive ministries where you find it. It's as important to say thank you for something that's made a big difference as it is to say this shouldn't be happening. And I think as a strong message from the report is don't accept discrimination. Do not accept it.
Thank you. Those are some real practical steps, things that are easy to do, but that can have a great impact on the conversation and on changing the culture in the church and the homophobic system. Well, thanks, Emery, for all of those insights. We're now going to turn it over to our viewers to see if you have any questions for Emery Martindale, the researcher who authored Lay Catholic LGBT Discrimination in the 21st Century, the report that's just been issued by the Global Network of Rainbow Catholics. So send your questions in and we will try to answer a few of them. Okay, Emery, here's one question that's come in. A good practical question. Will this report be available in other languages other than English?
That's a good question. Unfortunately, I only speak English, but I do understand that GNRC are producing the report in Spanish, and that doing research in different languages will be a consideration going forward. But they are a voluntary organization, so I think it would be great if they could get lots of support and be able to translate this into lots of different languages.
Mm-hmm. Great, that's good to hear. Make the research more widely available to people. Here's another question that's come to me. Is it possible, the questioner asks, is it possible to contribute towards future GNRC research as an individual or as an organization? I think that's a very good question. And I think if you do want to collaborate with GNRC, you should send a message to this email address, secretary@GNRCatholics, all one word, .org. Or you might send a direct message through Facebook or Instagram on the GNRC accounts. If you are part of an LGBTIQ plus community that's Catholic and would like to know more about the GNRC, again, just send a message through email, the same email address, secretary@GNRCatholics.org, or contact GNRC through the social media, Facebook and Instagram accounts that are up there. Okay. Well, as we end our presentation today, I think I want to first remind everyone that this report on lay Catholic LGB discrimination in the 21st century is GNRC's first published research report, and more studies are going to become forthcoming. As of today, right now, the report that we've been discussing is freely available online at the GNRC website, which is www.rainbowcatholics.org. And right now, it's in English as a downloadable PDF file, and a Spanish translation is on the way. So do please visit the website, www.rainbowcatholics.org, and follow GNRC on social media so that you could be made aware of more articles, witness statements, and news on LGBTIQ plus Catholic issues. Well, thank you, Emery. Your work on this report has been a major contribution to our Catholic Church's important conversation of LGBTIQ plus topics.
Thank you, Frank, for the opportunity to talk about this important issue.
We're glad you're here and very appreciative. And I also want to say thank you to our viewers for tuning in for this live stream. The global network of Rainbow Catholics and its member organizations are here to serve you. So please don't hesitate to contact us. We hope you will tune in for our next GNRC live episode. If you join the mailing list on our website, www.rainbowcatholics.org, you will be informed about all of our projects and programs. So right now, we're going to end this transmission, and again, thank everybody for joining us today, and may God bless you all. Bye now.
Bye.